You're joining the conversation with Shortlisted, a podcast from the Greater Midwest Chapter, or GMC, of the Association of Proposal Management Professionals. We chat about proposals, the business of winning work, and nailing the shortlists in our lives. I'm Paul Lockwood, Senior Pre-Sales Support Analyst at Vitality Group in Chicago.
And I am co-host Heather Finch. I lead a team of proposal and presentation solution specialists, and I'm located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Cool. Today, we're talking with Dr. Lori Coffae, a strategic writer and communication consultant. Lori, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Paul and Heather. Hello, and thank you for having me. The tell me about yourself question is always an interesting one. So I come from a background primarily in academics and somehow found my way into the world of proposals. And that academic background includes a master's degree in technical writing. I have always been a lover of words and a lover of books. My undergraduate degree, in fact, was in literature. But I got faced with that age-old question, what do you do with an English degree? So I went forth and earned that master's degree in technical writing so that I could create the books that people may read one day, or at least at that time, software manuals. And from there, I serendipitously stumbled into teaching a college level writing course. And I found my passion. I realized how much I loved teaching and writing and what a beautiful intersection that was. So I taught for a few years. And at one point, the chair of the English department said, if you really love this teaching gig, you should just go get a PhD. So I said, okay, and applied to a few programs that interested me. And I ended up at New Mexico State University, where I got a PhD in rhetoric and professional communication. And I'll tell you an interesting side story. The reason I chose New Mexico State University was because there was a professor there at the time who taught the rhetoric of humor. And that alone compelled me to choose that school and that location. And I did study under him for quite a few years.
Cool. So with the last name of Coffae, you never did any Java programming?
Oh, that's so good. I never did Java programming, but I do a whole lot of drinking.
Okay.
And I'm not Irish, but I do enjoy Irish coffee.
Okay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about rhetoric? What is it? Why is it a skill? And hopefully those aren't rhetorical questions.
Well, I'll wait. If it is a rhetorical question, I just won't answer it. But if you would like an answer,
Yes.
I have a few versions, so I'm going to try to share some of those versions with you both today. My easy button answer is that rhetoric is the practice of using all available means of communication to reach a specific audience and to shape the way that that audience thinks and feels, ultimately in an attempt to persuade them, to get them a little closer to what you want them to think, feel, and probably do at some point, to take action. So we can immediately think all proposals probably rely to some degree or another on rhetoric. But I also took a few notes because I am a nerd. I should have mentioned that in the tell me about you section. Rhetoric is a philosophy of communication also. And I think this idea, and diving in a little deeper, really comes from some of my studies, getting that doctorate of philosophy. We can use the concepts and the tools of rhetoric, there are several of those. I've done workshops on those, Paul. And we can use tools to construct our messages very intentionally, but also to analyze messages that have already been produced or composed. And we could think of this with proposal evaluators. They might not recognize that they're using rhetorical tools and skills, but they probably are. They're just not named. So rhetoric can be kind of a front end process tool and also an evaluation tool. And if you'll allow me to add one more, I'm dominating this conversation. But I found this beautiful quote the other day in an old textbook from my PhD program, and here it is. Rhetoric reflects our choices. It shows us a better vision of what we can become. The good rhetorician always holds in mind the ideal and the ethical for a particular audience in a particular situation. And I feel like that's very important to share on this podcast.
So, I mean, it sounds to me like, to put it into my own simple words, like rhetoric is a framework. It's a framework that you can use, tools that you can use to build it out. And I think back, and I promise, one of these famous Heather meandering questions, I'll come around to it. It'll take me a minute, but I'll come around.
I love it.
So I studied creative writing for my undergrad, and you learn about the different techniques and forms and stuff that you can use. And I think like sometimes having structure and having rules and limitations can actually enhance creativity. And I could go on a whole tangent about that. But before I do that, like I think about like writing a sonnet, and you have to put words in a certain way and have certain rhymes, and that forces those words, like you have to think more creatively to put those words into place. Is that also a way that we could look at rhetoric?
Absolutely. And I actually love the intersection of creative writing with professional writing or rhetoric. I tend to use those terms synonymously, professional writing and rhetoric, because again, to me, writing professionally is writing rhetorically. And it's an incredibly creative endeavor, right? I mean, anytime we're choosing what words to use, and I would argue in creative writing, maybe the audience is a little different and maybe the context is a little different, but we're essentially doing the same thing.
Yes, you're definitely trying to lead people to a certain feeling, to a certain reaction, whether it's creative writing or whether it's rhetoric.
That's right.
For some reason, my mind was going to Fiddler on the Roof. Rhetorician.
We can do a whole song and skit doing, I would love to do some songwriting with you.
How do you get audiences to feel and think? How do you help your clients to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So part of the process that I use to make decisions that I hope will evoke emotions in an audience and certainly shape feeling is what I call defining my objectives. Before I start almost any piece of, even if it's something on social media that I don't know how many characters Twitter allows anymore because I don't really use Twitter anymore. But even if it's something very short and sweet, let's say a quick email, all the way to a large, even federal proposal, Heather, I consider that creative writing. I will sit down.
I do too, just for the record, I do
right?
too. Yeah.
I mean, everyone has this idea of federal that you can only use these 7 words. And I'm like, why would
But
you
then
limit
you really
yourself?
have to be careful about the placement and yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even visuals or whatever you're allowed to do. So I define my objectives. I sit down even in 2023 or whatever year we're in, and I have a sheet of paper where I identify the audience or audiences that I am writing this message to. I write down the purposes, and I'm using plural because there's typically more than one person reading, or potentially more. So even if I'm sending something to a CEO, come on, that CEO might be sharing that email or hitting the forward button. It could get copied and put into another email response with more people on the list. So we all know about the permanence of our words right now. So I will identify as much as possible different audiences. And yes, I do my research. So I am, again, this is academic 101, where I will take 20 minutes sometimes and research even just one person who I might think will be reading that document. And then purposes. I'm going to use this example. We always think the purpose of a proposal is to win the contract. Who won? When are they announcing the winners? But I will sit down with my team and say, what does it look like to win? Maybe getting shortlisted is a win for us. Maybe knocking out an incumbent is a win. Maybe just introducing ourselves to this audience can be a win. So I think we have to broaden our definitions and articulate explicitly what our goals are. And the last thing I look at in that defining objectives is the context in which I'm writing. What time of year is it? I kid you not. If we're sending in a proposal and it's the holiday season, I am paying attention to that. I might be writing shorter paragraphs. I might be making the headings a little more readable. Whatever it is that I'm needing to tweak or nuance, if it's federal proposal season or the beginning of a school year and I'm writing a K-12 proposal, I will pay attention to what time it is, what's going on in the world, why they're asking for this response in the first place. And that's transferable across all sorts of writing. That's the first thing I do. Are we ready for more?
Well, I just
Sure.
think I want to interject and just be clear.
Interject.
We all think getting shortlisted is a win around here. Just
Right?
Oh, yes. And getting on
I know.
shortlisted is also a win.
For me, it is. This is my first podcast.
Oh,
So this is a
that is very
win for
exciting.
me.
Mhm.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
So I'll go off on another tangent. Here's another way I try to evoke emotion. I use words that I think will evoke emotion. So I will write down sometimes my hot list of words and I put it on a sticky note next to my computer and I think, how can I weave in some of these words that may evoke emotion? I don't know, are either of you familiar with the rhetorical triangle?
I know about
No.
triangles, but I'm kind of a square myself.
Well, I'm going to make you even more square. Get ready. Whoever thought that math and writing could be friends like a Reese's peanut butter cup? They're two great things that go great together. As far as I'll ever get with math is when I get a paycheck deposited or when I'm talking about the rhetorical triangle. So the rhetorical triangle is something that Aristotle developed to help, back in the early days of rhetoric, we only were using argument orally. There was far less writing. So Aristotle developed this idea of the triangle to help orators remember what 3 appeals they could use to reach an audience, to get that audience to think and feel. So this is really directly answering your question, Paul. And those 3 points on the triangle, each point refers to a different appeal. There's the appeal to logic or logos. There's the appeal to our sense of ethics, so having good character, and that's ethos. And then there's the big guns, and that's the appeal to emotion, which is pathos. So we kind of walk around in the world having an understanding of pathos and ethos because we hear those words being used. Logos, I think, gets ignored, but it is certainly an important one in proposal writing because that's providing evidence. If your assertion is we're the best company for this contract, you then have to say why and show why, and that's the logos. So I will outline how I can use those 3 appeals. And yes, emotion plays into proposals as well.
So you
Absolutely.
use all of
Absolutely.
those. You use
Use
all of
them all.
those.
I do. And I hear you. I'm going back to the idea of like this intersection between writing and math, because I do and we kind of joke sometimes in the proposal world, or at least I do, about the pricing people are the math and the numbers people, and we're the words and the pictures people, right? But there is a really strong overlap with that. There's an author, and let's not let the cat distract too much from this, but there's an author that I was able to get to know a little bit when I was in my undergrad named Bonnie Jo Campbell. If anybody's looking for a recommendation she writes this great atmospheric, very like Midwest rural kind of settings, just wonderful writing. But she actually like was studying math in college and almost finished the program, and then realized that she fell in love with writing, and then took that. But she says there is a lot of overlap between those two things, and you think about the equation of this plus this equals this, and that's how you make that appeal in a
That's right.
proposal or in an argument. Like you think about like this plus this will cause this reaction.
I love that. And I love the idea too of the rhythm of writing
Yes.
and how we can
Yes.
engage people. You know, I just had someone ask me the other day, what grade level do you recommend writing your proposals? And I don't like giving a grade level to proposal writing because it strips away, I think, the ability to be creative and to understand the humanistic side of readers and evaluators. And as soon as you reduce something like writing to a grade level, you lose the ability to have sort of that lyricism. And to me, that's math. There's math in that, right? Music and math are also closely related. So I always am trying to write to a rhythm that a reader will enjoy reading. Can you imagine enjoying reading a proposal? That's always on my goal list when I'm defining my objectives. And that leads me to one of my last points, and then I'm going to try to take a breath. Paul, to your question about how do I get audiences to think and feel using rhetoric, one of the, or largely, the interdisciplinary nature of rhetoric is based on philosophy and psychology. And I really tap into those two things a lot. Heather, I wrote down the name Bonnie Jo Campbell because I'll go directly to these sources. And whether it's emulating their writing or borrowing a concept and then applying it to my proposal writing, I'm always trying to make it better.
So it sounds like you're a big fan of Bonnie Jo Campbell, but I've heard Campbell's good. That's what I heard about Campbell.
You can also use humor, by the way, to get people to think and feel in the way you want them to.
I did want to ask, I'm just curious. So Paul uses a lot of wordplay, and puns and wordplay can be very controversial. To me, I find it very mirthful. And I equate it to like a painting that just puts a smirk on your face. Like that is how wordplay resonates with me. So I'm curious, like, what is the rhetoric of Paul's humor?
Oh my gosh. Paul, it's the great equalizer because it connects us all, no matter where you are in headspace or in the room. Paul, using his puns, will get you to stop and think about what he's saying. And if you're quick enough, you might elicit a giggle or a laugh or a smirk. If you're not quick enough, and I'll admit, maybe I'm not as caffeinated as I'd like to be, Paul will at least get you to stop and think. So you are very gifted, Paul, in using the rhetorical skill of humor. And I would say that's pathos. And you disarm is what you do. It's
Actually,
very charming.
There was a time when I was on Merv Griffin's Crosswords as a contestant, and one of the clues that they gave was that a pun can cause this five letters, and I knew the word was groan. So I did get that one correct. That was like a tee up for me.
With no letters filled into that crossword at all? Or did you have the G?
No, they didn't. In that particular game, they didn't show you any of the letters.
Wow.
So a 5-letter word that could be correct for the definition wouldn't necessarily be the one they were looking for. And so they'd say, I'm sorry, that's wrong.
It's very sneaky of them.
So you wanted to say laugh, but you had to say groan because you knew that's what they were looking for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are you great at Wordle?
I'm pretty good.
Have you gotten it in one?
I have not gotten it in one.
Do you
I have
know
not.
that my birthday was about a week ago, and on my birthday I got Wordle in one guess.
Oh, that is very impressive. That should be coming up. The best thing that happened to you this month, probably. I mean, that should be right
Can
up
we
there.
edit it? But I have a caveat that I need to share about that. So let me know if we're going to edit this, and I'll share the caveat.
Share the caveat. Share it.
The caveat is I told you when I got the Wordle in one guess on my birthday, because it's not as impressive when you know what the word was that day.
What
it
was the
birth?
word?
Birth.
Yeah.
No, that's like kismet. That's what that is.
That is kismet. That is
Yeah.
serendipity, and I wasn't even that proud.
Oh, that's so sad. The universe orchestrated this amazing, wonderful thing for you, and you were just like, ah, whatever.
I mean, I will say I had to be open to the idea of going, what should the word be today? That is my first guess. And I went with it, but
See, you received the message.
did.
That is not typically my first guess as a word. I always go with something that's got more vowels.
Ocean.
Oh,
Great
yeah.
first guess. Ocean.
Yeah.
Ratio,
Yeah.
if you want a mathematical kind of word.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to keep bringing math back into this. How weird for me.
Well, we need to move on after math, so to speak. And that was a wonderful coffee break, but we're going to move on to our next segment here, which is what's the best thing that happened to you this month? And I'm going to go first this time. I usually have a number of puns in my response to this question. Actually, not this time. I was the successful bidder at a silent auction for the school district foundation in our area. And I won a 4-hour police ride along.
Oh.
So I got to ride along with a young police officer who is actually a school resource officer at one of our local high schools. And I was informed that morning he was the police officer of the year last year.
Oh.
And I asked in advance of the powers that be at the police department, can I bring along a little audio recorder? Because I'd like to potentially write about this as a topic for one of my monthly column in a weekly newspaper locally. I was allowed to do so. I asked him a ton of questions during the 4 hours or so we were riding along the streets of Woodstock, Illinois here. Everything about the safety of our community, why it's safe, whether he watches TV shows about cops, whether he'd always wanted to be in law enforcement, whether he's pulled a gun on anyone, what it's like being in law enforcement in the aftermath of George Floyd and some of the police brutality incidents that have happened nationwide. And I was able to use a lot of that in my column, which ended up being long enough that it's been broken into 2 parts.
Wow.
So the first part just ran this week in our weekly paper, and the second part's going to be next week. They even teased it on the front page of the paper. All Lockwood does a ride along with the police. But at the really interesting thing, and I had a positive opinion of him at the end of this, but even more so, I wasn't able to find out at the time why he was the officer of the year, because it was a juvenile case related or involved a juvenile. And so just this week, it was announced apparently at City Council kind of why he'd gotten the award. It was regarding his diligence in investigating a student who didn't attend a single day in the 3 or 4 weeks of the start of the school year. It appeared that he found that student and 4 other children living in squalid conditions, suffering from malnourishment. In fact, this high school student was in an emaciated state, had a broken leg that wasn't medically treated properly. So charges are pending. The suspicion of possible criminal activity stemmed from his initial conversation with the student's mother at the door of the home. So I was, my opinion of him shot up way, way high. And I will permit myself one pun. I wish all of the police officers would they police be like him?
That's wonderful. The power of one person caring.
Yep.
That's a nice way to say it.
Lori, what was the best thing that happened to you this past?
Well, besides getting the Wordle in one guess and subsequently in two the next day, which was, I feel, more my skill than just a guess. I had a lovely birthday. My daughter was accepted to Boston University, which was her dream school. And so over my birthday, we took her to Boston and celebrated there and didn't even hate getting snowed in because I am from Florida, Paul and Heather, and I am not used to snow or getting snowed in. And we enjoyed our time there very much. So that was probably a highlight for me in March. We are the only spring breakers, I would argue, that probably went north towards the snowstorm. And it was delightful.
That's lovely.
Sounds like you had a ball. I guess it was a snowball.
No, it didn't even stick on the ground. So I have a little bone to pick with Boston about that. Oh, and we had a celebrity sighting. I should add that, but don't ask me to name the celebrities because they're not at the tip of my tongue right now. And but they're from White Lotus and The Sopranos.
Oh.
And they sat at the table next to us. We felt very important.
Did you talk to them?
No, I do not do that. I leave them alone. And they saw me, but they didn't talk to me either. So I'm sure they're telling someone. Just kidding. Thanks, Heather. I got a bigger laugh from Heather from that than any of your puns. Just want you to know.
Oh, the battle begins.
I can weave a story, Paul.
Okay.
I tried to pull that on my husband, though. I was like, well, they're probably wondering if they should come talk to us. We were the only two tables in this restaurant, so it was quite an experience.
I'm surprised the waiter didn't try to introduce you and offer them coffee.
They tamped it.
Offer them coffee.
Yeah. Oh, wait, I should give a heartier laugh to that, shouldn't I? I gotta be fair.
Groan.
Heather, what was the best thing that happened to you this month?
So I'm going to preface this a little bit just to kind of show the reason that the things that have happened have been so particularly impactful. So over the last couple of months, work has been very busy. I've been traveling a lot. I got 2 cases of COVID. So in between working a lot, having to go into isolation, just feeling like this sense of like, work is dominating my life lately. I can't, and I don't really have an option because I'm in isolation. Feeling, of course, grateful that I can work from home and, I didn't have a disruption in my income or anything like that because of it. But just, feeling a little overwhelmed and starting to go down the path of being burned out. And so this last week I traveled to our Bethlehem, Pennsylvania office. And I got to see my team, or some of them, not the whole team, but I got to see some of them. And that was very, like replenishing. While I was out there, I stopped at this park called Ringing Rocks Park, and it's a boulder field. And by some magic of the composition of the boulders and the way that they are lay in the ground and in this boulder field and on top of each other, and the I don't know if it has to do with like the shape of the land, whatever. When you hit these rocks with a hammer, they ring. So it was this wonderful, like magical little bit. Last night when I was flying home, I got to see the Northern Lights from the airplane, which was another just like such a magical and unexpected experience. And I'll even say this conversation has been such an anchor to that of like being able to nerd out on words and just have like that kind of like these things that help you remember why you're in the world. I feel like I've had that kind of a week, which has been a very good counter to some of the previous weeks that I've had.
Well, I've heard about that boulder place that those rocks really get drunk because they get hammered all the time.
we need to do a neuro scan of your brain to see how you do what you do, Paul.
I know.
It is so fast.
That would be fascinating.
The speed with which you design your puns is pretty amazing. Heather, I am so happy you had your window open, or whomever you were sitting next to, so that you were able to see that.
Yes. Yeah.
You were also open to that. That's amazing.
Yeah. And the pilots did announce it too, which was, very, very cool. Everybody was like, oh,
yeah, that's, I have never seen them in person. So that is an incredible.
Yeah.
There's a lovely book of poetry by a scientist called Responsibility to Awe, AWE. And you just made me think about that, because I do think we have a responsibility to see the awesome in a boulder or in an airplane. From an
Because
airplane.
of where you were when you saw them, you could call them the pilot lights.
Groan.
That was a bit of a groaner. Oh yeah.
They're all great. Even if I'm groaning, I'm giving you some credit in my head.
You're still at least the groan acknowledges the pun. I feel like that's key.
True.
We just need some reaction. I'm not nearly as prolific as Paul, but I do throw down a couple of puns every once in a while, and I'm like, somebody get it. Like, please don't leave me with the only one acknowledging how funny this is. So
the truth for me is I am a much better writer than I am speaker. So I am very witty in my writing. I am not quite as witty in my off the cuff.
Maybe you just feel that way though. I feel like
it's pretty objectively true.
You seem pretty witty. You seem pretty yeah. All right, well, I think let's move on to Dear GMC and see if we can give advice to one of our members. So, Dear GMC, as a proposal manager on a small team, I spend a great amount of time and resources over the last couple of years building out our repository of resumes, project sheets, and boilerplate. They get the job done, but they're not really compelling. I'm trying to get approval to hire a summer intern or a consultant who could spend some time interviewing staff and revamping the content that we have. How should I defend the ask or illustrate the value of storytelling to our hiring manager? Sincerely, Anita Ryder. So, Lori, I feel like you've got something ready for this person.
Well, Anita Ryder, here's what I would say. The first thing that came to my head is not punny at all, but it is a almost indisputably effective phrase, which is, are you willing to consider? And if we use this phrase, particularly when we have an ask that may require some investment, it has proven to be extremely effective in terms of the outcome and the results. And here's why. And we're going a little bit into the philosophy and psychology again. Very rarely does a human being who cares about the work being produced and the well-being of the employees, very rarely will they want to be perceived as someone who is disagreeable to considering. If you can create enough space and someone says, I'm willing to consider, you have a foot in the door, and then you can take a little bit of time to work on the actual request. We already know as proposal writers that we have to show value when we're asking people to spend money. So I would probably start by reverse engineering once I have the willingness to consider. I would start with the rationale, the logos, if you will, maybe even establish a little ethos, like here are some of the wins we've had and the success that I have had as a writer. But we are at a point, because we've been so successful, where we need some extra resources. So now here's the ask, and then you certainly can give a reason or two why a consultant is actually very thoughtful. And then I would thank that person. I'm assuming all of this is being written in an email situation. I would thank that person, not for their time, which is a little bit of a no-no in my rules of thumb book, I would thank that person for their consideration, or thank that person for being so supportive, or thank that person for their care and concern, and
and
use
that's,
those words.
I was coaching one of my team members just about sometimes in communications, like you have to ask the question that you want the answer to. So, and it's leading, but it's not manipulating, right? Like by thanking somebody for their consideration, you're saying, I'm like, what I want top of mind is that you're thinking about this,
That's
right?
right.
Versus thanking somebody for their time. Well, that's already done.
That's it.
Mhm.
It's done. And when you make someone aware of the time that they're spending, they
Mhm.
sometimes get cranky about that. I actually bristle sometimes when people say,
Yeah.
thank you for your time. And then I look down and I realize I've spent 40 minutes with that person, like helping them with their problem. But
Yeah.
if someone says, thank you for your collaboration, I feel all warm and fuzzy. And I feel like I'm a collaborator and a
Mhm.
good colleague.
Mhm.
And again, here we are talking about how we can shape someone's feelings. It's as easy as the words we choose to use, and it is being a little bit more precise. I do want people to be collaborative and considerate,
Mhm.
so I'll thank them for that.
Yeah. Paul, do you have any thoughts on this one?
So I looked at it more of the comparison of, storytelling versus just a fax ma'am kind of thing. Um, so my thought went to, okay, the hiring manager is the one making the decision. Let them see for themselves what a changed answer could look like.
Mm,
Compare what we currently have to what a storytelling uh, ethos or whatever kind of version could look like. And kind of give them it doesn't have to be a real long answer. Maybe it's just a couple of paragraphs of what we've used in the past, what this could be, and ask which of them would keep, if they were reading a proposal or reading an RFP response, which one would keep them reading? Which one would keep their interest? Which one would stand out?
it's a great idea.
Odds are going to be that storytelling one. Some of the most effective ways of answering a question can be to have a story that's relatable and to have something that is more than just the facts. When I write a review of a musical or play, I think, what do I need to communicate as far as the high points and any low points? But also, this is going to be about a page. How am I going to keep people interested? I need to assume they don't know the full story of this plot. So I have to give at least enough for them to understand what they're going to see. And then I can get into why it's worth seeing.
Smart. That idea of being relatable is goes back to a rhetorical theory called identification. And that's Kenneth Burke was a rhetorician who studied identification a lot. And it really is that how do we relate to other human beings? And of course, it is through storytelling and shared experience and things that resonate with us at the heart, right? So
Usually,
that's
if
what you're
I'm asked
saying.
for a form of identification, it's not a good thing.
Unless you're in the ride along with a police officer.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. So I like, and I think this is great, and I love the different perspectives. Like Lori, you're coming at it from like the how do you shape the ask, and Paul, you're saying like make sure you show some examples so that you can like actually see that tangible, what the future vision could look like, right? I think there's a couple of things that I would add to it. One, I will preach until the day is done that proposal managers and content writing are two, like they're two different skill sets. That doesn't mean somebody can't have both skill sets, but they are two very different skill sets. And the problem that will always come up is if you have your proposal managers writing and maintaining the content, the deadline is always going to win. And it's rare, at least for most of us, that we actually have the time, a chunk of time that's big enough that we can actually sit down and tackle this kind of stuff, because it takes being able to like clear, like at least for me in my process, like clearing out all of the worry of the other things that need to get done, being able to think creatively, being able to think expansively. And if you're trying to do that while you're doing proposals, it's just very difficult. Those two things don't add up. So I would always encourage companies to think about how can we find a resource that's separate from the proposal team. I mean, it can be part of the team, but somebody that is just focused on the content. I think with this one too, I would say, Lori, you were talking about how you really need to have clear objectives and being able to visualize, like, what does success in this project mean? So I think with this, like thinking about what is it that you really want to have done here? Refreshing the content is one thing, but is it that you just needs a little bit of a cleanup and a facelift? Is it that you really are trying to get that, like, the heart of the story and digging into things? Is it that it needs a complete, like, repositioning? And then ask for the resource that can help you accomplish that. And I say that because the question asker says to hire a summer intern or a consultant. And while there certainly could be value in hiring a summer intern, if you're looking for a real like positioning revamp, I think you're really going to want to ask for the resource that is seasoned. And if you put those two side by side, if you say either of these could get the job done,
right?
Yeah, I'm gonna pick the one that's right, like the free one or the very low cost one. So I think you would want to be thoughtful about that, and adding that. And I don't know, Lori, like maybe the initial ask is an email, but to me this is like a broader conversation where you're really getting like you've got to have influence with the key stakeholders that would be able to get you the funding.
I love that you bring that point up, because I want to say part of rhetoric is understanding the vehicle with which you communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you for clarifying that and calling me out on the email presumption I made, because you are correct. To be effective and to really have open dialogue about it instead of one-sided, right? A one-way street with email, and then it goes into where? The inbox where it might sit, how long, right? So asking, are you willing to consider meeting with me to discuss some resources that are needed in the email, then prep for the face-to-face meeting. And I know that I was asked not to say bad words on this podcast, but I'm about to say one. So this brings me to the idea also, because of this question, of Chat GPT. Edit it out if you have to. Because I do think that that's going to start becoming an answer. I am fearful that that might become an answer when someone asks for more resources around content. It certainly has already happened to me. Paul, you didn't ask me what the low point of my week was, but that was probably one of the low points when I have been asked several times by decision makers and authorities if we should just get Chat GPT, because it can at least get us started on some content, and then you, Lori, can clean it up. So I think it is important that when we're asking for resources around our content and our writing, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, Heather, that it is a separate entity from the proposal management and process endeavor. That's its own endeavor and its own initiative. The writing needs to be disparate with a bridge. Please, let's not use Chat GPT as a solution. And I know that could be a whole nother podcast, so let me know if you want me to come back. I apologize for the foul language.
Well, I think that's the perfect time to drop in a quick disclaimer and reminder. The advice offered in this podcast is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. Use of this podcast is not intended to replace or substitute any financial, medical, legal, or other professional advice. This podcast, its hosts, and APMP GMC are not responsible for the outcome or results following any advice in any given situation. You and only you are completely responsible for your actions.
Definitely true.
Amen.
So do you just want to be content with your content? Do you want to be happy with your content?
I have a sweatshirt that says content or content. We're not sure which, but I love to wear it around proposal people.
Okay, well, we won't sweat that. But if we're now on your final list of podcast favorites, love to hear from you. Submit your Dear GMC question or any other question or suggestion to admin@apmpgmc.org. To all those winning business out there, on behalf of me, Heather, and all of us in the Greater Midwest chapter, we'll GMC you next time on Shortlisted. Shortlisted.